Children of Morta is a fantastic roguelike action RPG, and maybe the best story I've ever experienced in a game. Its twist is that you don't just pick one character and play them exclusively. Rather, the game wants you to play and level up all the available characters, and rewards you heavily for doing so. Since multiplayer reviews are kinda our niche, we're gonna jump right in and talk about the multiplayer options and quality right away, and then do a normal gameplay review afterwards. Children of Morta does a fantastic job at allowing you to play co-op together in just about every way that exists. It's two-player co-op only, so no 3 or 4 person parties or competitive multiplayer or anything, but co-op methods are plentiful and work very well. For starters, it supports local co-op mode, so 2 players can play on the same PC. At least one player will have to use a controller, as keyboard and mouse is only available for one. I'm a keyboard purist, but being as this game also requires a mouse, the game gets a pass in my opinion on not trying to have players share a keyboard. Secondly, sometime after launch, the game added online co-op, so 2 players can play over the internet together. This does require each player to own a copy of the game, and it's also the only mode that allows both players to use a keyboard and mouse. Finally, Children of Morta also supports Steam Remote Play, which means you can remotely invite anyone on your friends list to play the game with you, even if they don't own a copy. If you've never used Steam Remote Play, it's absolutely fantastic, and I'm thrilled to see the indie scene in particular make such wide use of it. Some caveats are that the remote person will obviously need decent ping in order to be able to play and react well, and sometimes with slow connections, you'll also notice the graphics and audio degrading slightly. With any kind of a modern, fast connection, though, you should be absolutely fine. Also, at least one player will need to use a controller, but it can be either the hosting player or the remote player. Steam Remote Play has a menu that is accessible by hitting Shift-Tab that allows the hosting player to assign who is using what controls. Co-op is available 5 minutes in after completing a brief single-player tutorial, with no additional unlocks required for the main story mode. You can start a fresh game and story together, have your mate jump into the middle of your story progression, or do a run of Family Trials mode. But how does it play in multiplayer? In short, very good. It feels like Children of Morta was designed from the ground up, with co-op play in mind. Right away with the first 2 characters that start unlocked, you feel this as they complement one another very well. John, with sword and shield, is very good at surviving and blocking damage, but struggles with both single target DPS and closing the gaps to enemies. Linda, with bow and arrows on the other hand, excels at dishing out damage from far away, but being fragile, greatly benefits from having John go in first and draw the aggro of enemies, and then having the space to safely and calmly mow down everything in front of her. This sort of synergy continues later into the game, as you can focus on builds, where for example one character becomes really good at slowing enemies, and another character specs out to deal more damage to those slowed enemies. Additionally, the run only ends if both players are down, so you'll be rescuing each other a fair amount with the standard channeled revive mechanic. One thing I will mention though is that the game shares a screen for both players when using either local co-op or Steam Remote Play, so Raquel and I frequently found ourselves at the beginning of the game dying because we were on the edge of the screen, unable to kite away from death, because the other one of us hadn't realized they needed to help move the screen. We both really enjoyed co-op in Children of Morta. The story is so good, I didn't mind going through it for a second time with Raquel, and I loved getting to see her experience it for the first time. The combat continues to be really satisfying and allows me to get into a nice flow state. The challenge level in particular is really good, with not being so intense that you get annoyed at yourself or your co-op partner, but hard enough that it still feels like you're really gaming. I'll note that we did play on normal difficulty. Raquel said that she enjoyed combat isn't normally overwhelming, but allowed her to focus on only a few things at a time. There were moments that were overwhelming when we'd enter a new room with a ton of enemies or during a boss fight, but on the whole we were encountering things at a pace she could really enjoy. This is really important for us because Raquel doesn't have a ton of gaming experience, and there are plenty of games that seem fun when we start them, but just require too much of a mental load to play frequently. Morta's co-op is particularly great for players of different skill levels, but in a way that the less skilled player still feels useful. For example, often Raquel would play a ranged character, while I would play a melee one, and I would do a lot of the heavy lifting with aggroing mobs, as Raquel didn't have to kite and dodge as much. Her damage was still significant, and probably slightly higher than mine. We were even able to double down on this by putting more points into a skill that allows Linda the archer to do more damage while standing still. I had no trouble keeping track of my character in a single player game, since the screen is always centered on them, but in co op I found it pretty easy to lose track of my character or mistake the other character for mine. I don't have a good solution for this in local co op, but in online co op it would be really easy to just add a big arrow or something above the active player's head. A similar complaint is that ranged characters are less accurate in local co op or Steam Remote Play. This is because your partner can move the center of the screen, which can throw off your aim. We did our whole playthrough like this, so it didn't ruin our enjoyment of the game, but if you are tryharding, you might want to pick up a second copy. We also encountered a few annoying repeat bugs. There were multiple times where we would enter a special event area, complete the event, and then not be able to leave the area back to the rest of the map. It's like our characters would get stuck just before the door. Sometimes we could use the area teleporter to escape, and sometimes we could dodge out of the room, but not always. Another one we encountered only in co op is voice audio not being matched to the subtitles, or even voice audio being missing completely. Morta can be a bit grindy, especially in the middle of the game. It started to feel like we weren't making much progress, and we kept ending our runs at the same bosses over and over. Children of Morta is the complete package. Good gameplay loop, fantastic combat, amazing story, impactful loot, and fun upgrades. The core loop is pretty standard stuff for roguelites. Begin a run, fight enemies, find items that only persist for that run, find gold, morv, that you can use after your run to permanently upgrade character stats. Being a roguelite, there is a certain amount of randomness, so some runs won't feel nearly as powerful, and your chances of beating the area boss and progressing to the next won't be very high. Those runs rarely feel wasted, though, as you're still collecting morv and building your overall permanent power level. But when you hit that golden run, oh man, your damage goes through the roof, and you are melting things as soon as they appear on screen. Elemental attacks with poison and flame help shred through health bars, usually some way of avoiding damage, just blinding speed or blocks or lifesteal that enables you to just plow through enemies without constantly glancing and worry at your health bar. Maybe rocking a minion or two, or some one-shot weapons to deal massive damage. Before you know it, you hit the boss chamber, but you don't feel nervous and unsure like before. This time you're ready for the Goblin Brothers, ready to avenge the 7 times you've fallen to them before. That's not to say it'll be a breeze, no boss in this game is, but this time you've got the raw numbers to back up your skill. The fight is brutal and hectic. The second phase kicks in and the boss's attacks are harder to avoid and come faster and faster. You used your fully charged Guardian's Rage that you've been hoarding till this moment. The boss attacks fast, but you attack faster. Health bars of all the combatants plummet. You're so focused on kiting and attacking and dodging, you're surprised when things freeze and you realize you've done it. The boss is down. A pile of morv rains down around you. You collect it, and then it's back to the Bergson's house. Sadly, all your items from the run are lost, but you have a pile of morv and upgrade your damage permanently several times. Then it's time to start a new run. Maybe this time with a different character. Maybe you'll be slogging through again this time. Or maybe it'll be another golden run. I'm always surprised by how good the combat feels in this game, considering each character only has access to an auto attack, 2 abilities, and an ultimate form called Guardian's Rage. But it does a ton with this simplicity. For starters, health is a pretty limited resource in Morta, so you really need to focus on taking down enemies safely. And to that end, there is a limited number of enemies in each area, and they have very specific attack patterns that they always follow. So you can quickly learn what each enemy does and then fight them in a specific way. For example, skeletons always run at you from the front, stop, and then attack. Bats, however, will pause a short distance from you and either attack or fly away. After attacking, they'll change direction for their next attack. Many enemies, like the basic skeleton, can be stun-locked by attacking them, so as long as you get in the first blow, you can just keep swinging away until they're dead. Multiple enemies, of course, make this quite a bit more challenging, since you can only swing or attack with your auto attack in one direction, regardless of which character you're playing. Almost every time I take damage in Morta, I feel it was fair, and I'm able to break down and analyze what I did wrong so I can learn better for next time. Very similar to the combat and enemies in Dead Cells. A lot of other games in the genre, like Diablo 3, Torchlight, and Wolcen, I usually don't get this kind of clarity and have to just shrug and move on. Maybe that's the biggest difference maker. Combat means something in Morta. Every blow, every missed dodge, every health potion. Yet the game isn't overly punishing either. The combat against bosses feels completely different. Where combat against normal enemies can be approached slowly and methodically, boss fights are hectic and uncontrollable. Sure, you can still dodge attacks and should, but there's many, and they come fast. And there are lots of enemy minions as well. So it's more of a do your best kind of situation, instead of one where you were expected to play perfectly to succeed. You can usually be a little more methodical with the first half of a boss's health bar, but all hell breaks loose on that second half, and often it boils down to who can trade health bars faster, you or the boss. On the one hand, I don't like this, as it can just feel like you are going to take a ton of damage even if you play well. But on the other hand, it does really reward those who play well through the entire dungeon, as it really encourages things like entering the boss chamber with a full health bar, full Guardian's Rage bar, and saving your gemstones for that perfect item, instead of having to waste them on purchasing health pots. I have to take a moment to talk about the traps in this game too. Whichever did them deserves major kudos. There are only a few different kinds, but they are done so well. Most traps can be avoided fairly easily, like the rows of spike holes won't be quick enough to stab you as long as you keep running in the same direction without stopping. But they become fiendish in the right situations. Like maybe you start running up the screen across a row of holes, only to discover a ton of enemies that weren't visible before you started moving. You now either have to back up into the spikes or rush forward into the mob of enemies. On the other hand, I frequently find myself using the traps to help thin out groups of enemies, as it's easy to get a group to follow you and then run over a row of spikes, usually activating them right as the enemies following you cross over them. Most games want to do more with the player using environmental hazards to deal with enemies, but this game does it better than most. I don't understand why runes in this game are temporary. They are temporary drops in the dungeons that augment your basic attack or one of your skills. But it's not like you can save the runes for later or a boss or something, especially if the rune is on your primary attack. The game is already a roguelite, and power from a run isn't permanent, so just let the player keep the cool rune until the end of the run. Morta's also a little grindy, especially in the middle of the game. The character Joey feels just terrible. All the other characters feel great with how they can move and avoid getting hit, but with Joey, this just feels impossible. He's so slow and cumbersome that losing health just feels like an inevitability. Normally, Whirlwind is one of my favorite abilities in games, but his just feels useless. Without any form of stagger or healing attached, seems like he's just asking to take damage. Fortunately, there are 6 other characters to play, so you can avoid playing this one. Children of Morta's story is absolutely one of the best I've ever played. It's a courageous yet heartwarming tale about a family of warriors whose job is to protect the world. Yet it also has many moments that show the love the family members have for one another, and the way that they support and help each other through the stressful events of the story. Everything about the production of the game helps tell this story too, from the artwork to the music to the top-notch narrator voice, really helps set the right tone for the story. Even the gameplay itself helps tell the story really well. For example, as you level up characters, you'll unlock abilities where the inactive characters will occasionally pop onto the screen to shield the active character you are playing or damage a group of enemies surrounding you. It gives a strong reminder that you aren't doing this alone, even when playing in single player mode. There's a whole family that's got your back. The story moments are interspersed well throughout the game. Sometimes you'll get a cutscene when you get back to the house after a run. Sometimes you'll discover optional audio clips in the house that you can activate. Sometimes you'll enter a room of a dungeon and trigger a very short story about the people of the world.
As the conversation turned to the progress of the corruption, Mary was curious to know which village had been attacked this time. However, that worry gave way to panic when Lucy entered. Poor beasts, all slaughtered. Maybe something had infected them. The corruption was on their doorstep now.
I laughed many times at different moments, and a few made me cry. I hate the villain of the story and the pointless destruction caused by his bitterness. I love the Bergsons and their love and hope and determination to do the right thing. I love how everything in the game is done as a family, and your triumph as a player is their triumph together. At the climactic moment, I was literally yelling at the screen. Raquel and I both talked about getting the same feeling as when you finish an amazing book, where it's really good, but also you feel that sense of loss that it's over. So, how is it in 2022? There are three main things the developer has added since launch, and the first two especially drastically improved the game in my opinion. First, the developer released a free update that added online co op. You might be surprised that a game that focuses on co op so heavily didn't release with this feature, but I think it makes sense given that the game released around the time that Steam Remote Play was first becoming a thing. I also like when game developers try to cut scope on initial release, as long as it's not too painful for the players, as that means it eases the upfront costs on the developer, and ultimately we get more great indie titles. Regardless, we have online co op now. Second, we have an entirely new mode beyond just playing through the story, called Family Trials Mode. This basically serves as an alternative endgame content to New Game Plus, and has a stronger dose of roguelite randomness. You choose one character for the run, and instead of using the normal character talent tree and temporary runes like in the main story mode, you simply choose from one of three upgrades every time you level up. This allows character builds to become much more focused and potentially more powerful. For example, I did a crit based build with Mark that had a bunch of effects that would happen every time I crit, like AoE and poison damage. This kind of build would never have been possible in the main game, since every time you take something in the skill tree, the next level of that skill is going to cost more. In general, you get more items and upgrades than in story mode too, and are more powerful overall. This seems to be balanced out by monster mobs being larger and tougher. There are no areas to save progress in this mode, so you either beat the end boss or you die and completely start over. There is some progression that is achievement based. Beat the game as Linda, beat 5 bosses, things like that. But it feels more like each run stands or falls alone. Overall, this game mode is a great addition and adds a lot more hours of content to the game. Finally, we have 2 purchasable DLC packs and a free audiobook of short stories. Paws and Claws adds more pets to the Bergsons house. You can feed the pets snacks to gain temporary buffs like increased XP or crit chance. The additional XP is particularly nice since Morta can sometimes feel a bit grindy. We were able to find enough snacks that we could pretty much constantly keep the deer's 15% XP buff active the whole time. Ancient Spirits adds a new playable character, but only for Family Trials mode, not the main story. It also adds new items. I haven't purchased or played through this DLC, so I can't speak to it much. The final DLC is basically an audiobook that has 6 classic well known short stories, read by the narrator from the game and with a soundtrack from the game's music team. I thought it was less cool once I found out it's not original stories from the land of Rhea, but rather just readings of short stories from classic authors. It's available for free though, so I can't complain too much. In conclusion, Children of Morta is a fantastic title in the genre. It deserves the success it has seen, and I really hope more fans of the AAA titles like Path of Exile, Diablo, and Wolcen give it a try. It's also a truly excellent title to play with someone else, whether they are a casual game player or your try-hard bro. You can usually pick up this title at a Steam sale for $7 to $10, or at the time of this video, you can pick it up on g2a.com for $3, which makes it a must pick up in my opinion.